Hello everyone, I am excited for today's unboxing. A lot of people say, quit jabbering so much, get into opening the thing. I'm going to do that, but I'm going to talk while I do it. So I was contacted a few weeks ago by a new company that's a subsidiary of Armstreet. And if you don't know Armstreet as a company, as a reseller, you can go check out their website. I'll put it in the description, as well as Dangerous Knives. And they are a new company that's looking to break into the market with kind of new Hema-related swords. And they're really looking to cater to not just Hema, but also HMB and SCA. So they're looking to begin to offer a lot more in the way... Set that aside. A lot more in the way of kind of blunt practice weapons and things that can be used in sparring settings for various reasons. I'm going to figure out the best way to open this. And they wanted to get my input a lot more from the Hema side of things on this particular sword, but as well as just kind of in general. There we go. All right, all the plastic is gone, thankfully. So, we'll get to the sword itself. So this is a Saber. And it is, like I said, designed more generally for HMB, but the intent is that this can be used for something like Hema, for something like the SCA, although I do believe SCA doesn't really use steel weapons as much. This is... Like I said, Dangerous Knives. They are trying to break into the market and bring some new, fresh ideas, is I think really their intent into this. So here's one of their sabers. I don't know the exact name of it. I will look it up and make sure that I post it right here. But it is, actually, it's a lot lighter than I was thinking, quite honestly. Knowing something that's going to be put to its paces with something like HMB. People really wailing on each other with full armor, tends to be a pretty overbuilt weapon. And this doesn't really feel all that overbuilt. In fact, I have actual sabers that feel a lot heavier. And it's pretty darn well made. Now, I know their price range is kind of that mid-tier price range. And for HMB, that's probably a bit more expensive than their normal $100 to $200 price range they tend to go for. But I think the intent is that these are a little bit higher end, that are going to last a good bit longer. There's definitely some elements to the construction that feel really nice. This leather wrapping job is extremely firm. So I imagine that would hold up to quite a bit of abuse. It is a kind of an overbuilt or an oversized handle, a little bit to an extent, expected to be on a gloved or gauntleted hand. Most sabers actually have the ability to go to a pretty decent saber grip, and this allows for it. I would imagine that your palm would be a little bit further out if you're wearing large gloves. But yeah, this is actually surprisingly light. I really honestly didn't expect that with what I know just about generally overbuilt weapons. And I will, of course, go through the process of actually getting prepared for review. And it's going to be a little bit different for me, like I said, because I don't really know exactly how to put this through its paces for that purpose. But from a strictly Hema perspective, saber fighting is one of those things where there's quite a bit of variety and people kind of pick and choose what their interest range is for that. And I will say that with Hema, generally speaking, people look for weapons that are simulations or really good approximations for the historical weapons, which it tends to mean, accurate guards for the hand, which I don't know if this really provides as much. And that would just be one initial thought I would have for this kind of weapon. But the blunt edge is actually quite thick. So for the purposes of Hema, I would think that this would be more or less sufficient. It's a fairly thin overall blade for a saber, and you can see a good bit of flex there. But the tip isn't all that spatulated. It's actually the thinnest part of the blade. And generally speaking, for something like Hema, you'd want that to be maybe rolled a bit, or in this case, you'd need to tip it for the purposes of tournament fighting, etc. But I would think that, based on its size, it'll probably hurt when you get hit. This edge is, while it's blunt, I think it's probably at least a millimeter thinner than you would see on like a fader, let's say. And because of the way this is built, of course, you're going to have a lot more mass at the end there hitting than you would with like a fader. I think that's probably an element of the HMB side of the design. So comparisons between HMB and Hema. Generally speaking, the reason that I think HMB weapons are less expensive and honestly tend to just be more affordable in general, and they sit usually well below that $400 price mark, it has a lot to do with how they're made and the tempering process. Because Hema looks to get very accurate approximations of weapons, you end up with the need for more accurate tempering processes, and sometimes essentially dual tempering, where the top third of the blade is tempered slightly differently, so it has different flex. The steel doesn't have to be as overbuilt, and because you're not overbuilding it, you then have to account for the stresses you're going to put the weapon through a bit more in the construction and design, whereas HMB, they overbuild things. They tend to be a lot thicker and a lot more able to handle a beating just because of the mass of the weapon. Tend to be heavier than they probably really should be. And this seems to try to strike a balance between the two, in that this is certainly not nearly as overbuilt as some of the HMB weapons that I've held before, but it's probably maybe a bit too much in terms of what would be good for Hema purposes. But I don't know. I'm really going to have to give this a try. I'm going to spend some time with it. I'm going to do some, I guess Polish Saber drills with it and see how comfortable it is. And I'll probably use some Pell work with it just to kind of put it through its paces. Overall, in terms of construction, it looks pretty good. It's a very basic design. That doesn't really surprise me all that much. Like I said, these are really expected to be used. They aren't really expected to be put on a wall to act real pretty. So you'd expect it to get kind of beat up. Much like any type of fader, the functionality of this thing matters a lot more. I'm not entirely certain on the construction. It looks like it's a large peen that has been ground down, and I'll have to double check on all that, but that's going to be my guess, is that it's actually been peened at this end, but it's hard to tell. But yeah, as you can see, it's got a lot of flex. It's got a lot of bend to it, which is good. And on the edge, again, because it's fairly thick, it'll pack a pretty good punch. Like I said, I'm not real good on the HMB side, so I'll have to I'll ask around about really what people look for in that, because it's not my focus. But I'll certainly try to give it my best shot for a review from a Hema perspective. And once I spend some time with it, I'm also going to try to give a lot of good feedback to Dangerous Knives so they can modify their design and process. Like I said, they're really looking to get into the Hema scene and begin to offer it more there. It's a little bit out of their, I think, current comfort zone, and they're looking to get more comfortable with it. And I want to be able to provide them the best input I can. And yeah, I look forward to actually giving this a good try. I'm just going to take a moment here to talk about some of their other weapons. I've actually looked at some of the weapons that they're offering on the website, and some of them are really, really beautiful looking for being blunt practice weapons. They have a really, really nice looking Viking style weapon, kind of early migration era. And it's got this nice little etching on it, really beautiful. I told them that. I said, wow, I like the look of that sword. But they also kind of go for that quasi-historical, not quite modern fantasy design aesthetic, in that they're really trying to keep it simple. but not necessarily go much beyond some just general historic inspiration. And they're certainly not going for pure reproduction, which, to each their own. And I've said it before, I love reproductions, but I also like it when sword makers do their own thing. So they're really excited about this Saber. It's kind of one of their new offerings. They're really excited in general to begin to offer up a lot of new products. And they're definitely going to be one to watch and to see what they're able to do and how they're able to compete in the marketplace. So if you're wondering just kind of general first impressions for this sword, I would say that given the price mark, there might be other options out there if you're looking for high-end HMB, if that's what you do. I don't really have a good strict comparison for it. For Hema, it might be a bit high in terms of the price mark for that purpose because, we tend to have slightly less expensive weapons for things like sabers from what I've seen. And we tend to have just generally lighter weapons, so we don't hit quite as hard. And I feel like the overall mass on this, even though it feels light, is probably going to be a bit much for Hema-style saber work. I would imagine it's going to pack a punch, though, just from holding it. I'll do some measurements and tests and see what effective mass transfer would be and all of that. But yeah, it's a pretty interesting, well-made weapon. It's not perfect. I will say there is a little bit of a gap in the guard and the blade, but it feels very solid, and so their construction's good. There's a bit of just kind of raw, unfinished work here. It looks like a little bit of a waxy buildup. Things that kind of happen in the process of them manufacturing the blade. But I'll tell you, I think their leather wrapping job is pretty good. It's got to be epoxied on there. Based on what I'm seeing here. They've gone a little bit against the grain in terms of, or a little bit against historical inspiration with how they did the wrapping. I will say, just as a general note, you don't really want the seam on the edge. Or on the edge. You don't want it on the side. You do want it more on the edge. And usually you want it more on the back edge, mostly because of how it will actually get gripped and peeled up, especially with the use of gauntlets. So you want that seam very often to be able to sit in the palm of the hand, where it's protected more from the bits of the gauntlets or whatever you might be wearing that might pull on it. That's just a general wear and tear thing, and some immediate feedback I can give to Dangerous Knives. But other than that, I'm just going to spend some time with it. And it's a pretty basic thing, but I'm looking forward to seeing how it holds up to a bit of abuse. This has, of course, been offered up for the purposes of review, and as per my ethics statement, which it's been a while since I've mentioned it, I will, of course, be sending it back to them. I will not be keeping it, but I will be trying it out and giving it a good bit of use. I'll probably share it with a couple of people that I'm currently doing some saber work within Hema and get their thoughts on it. And we will see what I think about this in maybe a couple weeks when I get to do a review of it. I'm really looking forward to it, and I really appreciate Dangerous Knives reaching out to me and offering me the opportunity to try out some of their new products. And like I said, I think they're going to be one of the new makers to really keep an eye on and see what they begin to produce, because they already visually and aesthetically produce some pretty neat things. I can tell you that if I were an HMB style person, if I were someone who did that as a sport, I would probably be buying that Viking sword. But given the weight on it and the dimensions that I can read online, there's part of me that says I probably wouldn't buy it because I don't do HMB. But it looks really pretty. So I'm hoping they actually do something with that. Maybe make it a bit lighter, a bit more historically accurate, but with the same inspiration. And let that be something that maybe some of the Viking recreationists have as an option to begin using. Because I think their design on it is really worth a look. And really a lot of their designs look pretty nice, and their implementation's pretty good. I think that they need to fix a couple things just right off the bat. But, the rest I'll talk about in a full review. So I just wanted to kind of showcase that. And again, thank Dangerous Knives. And I guess I'll see you in the review of it in a couple weeks. Cheers, guys.